Hello, everybody. My name is Connor Lynch with Westwood Media Center. Today, we will be interviewing Stephen Lynch, the incumbent candidate running for Congress for Massachusetts 8th District. Congressman Lynch is currently running against candidate Dr. Robbie Goldstein. And as a reminder, these state primaries will be held in Massachusetts on September 1st, and Election Day will be held on November 3rd. Congressman, it's a great pleasure. Thank you for giving us the time today to talk.
Happy to do it, Connor. Thank you. I'd prefer face to face or mask to mask, but this will do for now.
Yeah, we got to make do in the crazy times, which we'll be talking about a lot today. But, we got to make do. And no matter what format it is, I'm sure everybody's going to be very eager to hear from you and hear a lot about what you want to talk about today.
Well, thank you.
So to get started, I wanted to give you a little bit of an opening statement, kind of tell us about who you are and what it is that you are running for and why you want to run.
Sure. My name's Steve Lynch. I'm currently the United States Congressman for the 8th Congressional District. I've been in office for about 19 years now. Some people are not familiar with my background, but I grew up in the Old Colony housing projects, had a rather very humble beginning, I'd say. I grew up the son of an iron worker and son of a postal worker. And when I came of age, I went to work as an iron worker with my dad. I actually rose in the ranks of the Iron Workers Union, got involved on issues like pensions and health care and worker safety in the iron workers industry. Traveled extensively as an iron worker, but eventually came back home and ran for the executive board, was elected to the Iron Workers Executive Board, and then was elected president of the Iron Workers. An odd thing happened when I was elected president. I thought I would actually be running the union. I found out that in order to sneeze, you had to check with the lawyers first. And so I actually decided to go to law school so that I might be able to run my own union the way I thought was right and make those decisions rather than deferring to lawyers. So while I was in law school, I did an internship with a labor law firm representing unions just to learn the ropes. And it just so happened that they had a requirement that you work 20 hours pro bono. The only requirement was that you work for free, you do 20 hours a week, and you can pick anywhere you want. So I went back to the housing projects where I grew up. And of course, I know all the families there. And I started representing families on issues like lead paint on their windows or asbestos on their pipes, or a lot of people were jammed with a lot of kids into very small apartments. So they were underhoused, so I would represent them. And as a matter of course, a group of the women in the housing projects came to me and said, we never ever see our elected officials down here. They had drug problems, they had gun problems, they had domestic violence problems, they had environmental problems. And they said, if you ran for office, we would elect you and you'd actually be getting a paycheck for all the work you're doing down here. So that's what prompted me. I went home to my wife and I said, these ladies have urged me to run. And so I became a state representative. I was only a state rep for 14 months. And I ran for state Senate when Senate President Bulger stepped down, ran against his son, and was fortunate to win. I worked in the Senate for about 6 years. And then eventually, when Joe Moakley passed away, I was able to succeed him with the support of his family and a lot of the other people in the district. So that's how there was nobody in my family ever involved in politics other than holding a sign or getting signatures for a candidate, maybe. So that's how I arrived here. I think I bring a very unique perspective to Congress. I'm the only iron worker in Congress. I'm the only union president in Congress. I was a welder out at the Quincy shipyard. I worked at the Framingham GM factory for a while. So I know what it's like to lose your job because of foreign competition. I know what it's like to scratch out a living day to day, week to week, paycheck to paycheck. And there are very few people with that perspective in the United States Congress. So it's been an honor for me to serve this district and the towns and cities involved. And I look to continue the work. I think this is a very, very important election, both in Congress and the White House. But hopefully we will come through this. I think the wind is at our backs in terms of people that want change, and I'm happy to bring that change.
And I think it's very important, and you put it best yourself, that you come from a very unique perspective and a unique background that I think every candidate always has something to bring to the table. But certainly somebody who grew up as an iron worker and kind of came into politics through that window is a very unique perspective. And I think that that's very appreciated, especially as a congressman writing this legislation, because you get to service the people who really need help, and you understand those needs very well.
Right. It's different, and it's not shared. I actually formed the Labor and Working Families Caucus to try to explain to people, what it means to, be stand in an unemployment line, which I've done before, and especially now where we're fighting over whether unemployment benefits should be extended and what that means to families. I think I've been in the unemployment line several times because iron workers, when the job's finished, you go back on unemployment. So I don't need someone to explain that to me, and I try to explain it to others.
So I think you touched upon this a little bit in your opening statement, but I do want to give you a chance to kind of answer the question of, what do you see your role as a congressman to be? What specifically does that mean to you, if you were to explain that to somebody who might not be familiar with the ins and outs and the facets of the job?
Well, there's the official role, which is you're a lawmaker. And so, if I was going to be a cook, I'd go to cooking school. So as an iron worker turned legislator, I trained myself. I went to Boston College Law School. I understood how to put the law together, how to read it, how to analyze bills, how to put bills together. So I worked at it. It wasn't something that I was naturally exposed to. Then I went to Harvard University, Kennedy School of Government, and got my master's in public administration to try to discern the most effective way to turn policy or ideas into policy, and then policy into action. And I think that was very, very helpful in terms of the official job, because my official job is a lawmaker, but that is only, I would say it's probably 15% of what I do, maybe 20%. I also founded a residential drug rehab facility for adolescents. That's not in my job description, but I did it. I started a charter school because a lot of the families in my neighborhood were leaving the city because they did not have faith in the public schools, and they felt that they had to leave the city in order to get that. And we were trying to keep them here. So those are not particularly traditional for a member of Congress to do, but you do what you have to. I think my strengths are being hands-on. So I'm in the district every week. I have my wife and my girls are here, and I don't spend more than necessary time down in DC. I do my work there, but I try to keep my hand in local politics here as much as I can. I go to town meetings all the time. That's a regular occurrence for me. I talk to other congressmen around the country and even here in Massachusetts, and that's not really the practice. That's not what people do. But I feel that going to town meetings, you're listening to the people who are the movers and shakers, and the people who are intimately engaged in what's going on in their towns and in their cities. So I think it serves me very well to stay in tune with that. I have a very active district. People rely heavily on their congressman, and so I get questions on everything. I've helped people with dentures. I had a woman who had her grandson's graduation, and she could not get her dentures in her mouth. They had made them, and there was an abrasion. So I called the local community health center and got her teeth so she could get them in her head and go to her grandson's graduation. I've gotten calls about Jimmy Buffett tickets. Who would think of that? People complaining that the scalpers had bought up all the Jimmy Buffett tickets, so we had to give hell to the ticket agencies and to the venue to say, hey, you've got to distribute these things reasonably. I've had heartbreaking calls, from grandparents who had custody of their grandchildren who were born HIV positive, and they were in public housing, senior housing, where they could not bring a child in. And so we had to figure that out. So, every gamut of human life, every aspect of it comes through your door. And, I just, my staff, I have a wonderful staff, bunch of young people mostly, a couple of gray hairs there. But, I just tell them, whatever the issue is, we are problem solvers, whether it's a Social Security check. I spent a lot of time at the VA with my veterans. Uh, you know, we treat it as an opportunity when someone picks up the phone and calls our office. And I think that's been my success as a member of Congress.
It's less of representing the entirety of the district and more representing those specific people who need those needs and need those helps. I feel like that's a big thing, and especially comes a lot with the role. Obviously, yes, representative of the district, representative of the whole of it, but it sounds like a lot of your work is the nitty gritty with people and protecting the home front a little bit. And I think
Right.
that's a wonderful way to look at it.
Well, thank you. I'm blessed. I've got 22 towns and 3 cities, and I'm blessed. All good areas that I'm happy to spend time in.
Absolutely. So as you kind of noted before, we're talking over Zoom. This is the year 2020. It is
Yeah.
the year that we've been given. I wanted to talk a little bit about how the coronavirus and all the shutdowns and whatnot have impacted your ability to reach people, and how you see it kind of in the future impacting your ability to perform as a congressman.
Well, that's a great question. It's a real challenge. I see it in my own house. So, we have one of these 3-deckers in South Boston, and my mother-in-law and my in-laws live on the first floor. And she's 95 years old. She's a Gold Star mother. Her brother Arnie was killed during the Second World War on a parachute jump over the Rhine. She's 95 years old, and right now, she's basically sequestered in her apartment. And nervous about going out, even though she has a car and all that. She's very capable. But my wife is the one who goes in and sees her every day. And I, myself and my girls, we sort of waved from the doorway, nervous about bringing anything in there and affecting her. So I see that playing out all across our society, and across the homes of this district and families. So it's a game changer, obviously, and we need to take all the precautions we can to protect seniors and vulnerable populations. When this first broke, I have a lot of nursing homes in my district. We've had some horror shows, I have to admit, in Norwood, in Canton, even in South Boston, right down the street. We've had, in some of those nursing homes, we've had dozens of people pass away. So my first effort was to try to get PPE. It was very slow in coming. I do serve on the National Security Subcommittee, so I spend a fair amount of time overseas in other countries. So we did have relationships with China. So we try to work with them, and then some of my local suppliers. To make a long story short, I was able to get tens of thousands of masks, and had my staff drop them off at the nursing homes, the hospitals, first responders. I know we dealt with Westwood, particularly Dottie Powers and others there, to try to make sure we had coverage for PPE. Then we got face shields. Gillette, Procter & Gamble started manufacturing their own face shields, and they were great. Tens of thousands of those they were able to get to me, and we were able to spread them out to the nurses. And I work with the Mass Nurses Association pretty closely. Great group of men and women over there. And we try to make sure that they had the equipment that they need, especially visiting nurses, because they were going into homes and seeing patients one at a time, didn't necessarily have all the resources they needed. So we weighed in heavily there. We passed the CARES Act, which provided billions of dollars, actually $1 trillion, to try to allow people to stay within their homes, get a paycheck, and pay the bills hold everybody harmless, including rent stabilization, where we didn't allow people to go up in their rents. We're trying to send them a check to keep them in their homes and to pay their rent. We stopped all evictions. The landlords, we prevented anybody from foreclosing on a landlord because they weren't getting the rent because we had put a rent freeze in. We put an eviction freeze in. So we try to hold everybody harmless right up the chain to stabilize the situation. Going forward, Congress also had to change what we're doing. In the early days, there were only 4 or 5, maybe 10 people on a flight. But now, as people are getting busier, especially flights going south, which Washington is south, the flights are getting a little bit more crowded now. But everybody's got to wear a mask. And then when we get in session, we've got a whole different protocol that we vote in sort of a piecemeal fashion. We stay in our offices, then they call us alphabetically to the floor and we vote. But I do miss the debate, open debate and engagement with members back and forth, and doing that on Zoom, it's
It
what we
lacks that zeal. It lacks that punch and effectiveness.
That's right. The instantaneous and I don't know. It's just a little bit. There's too much space between members, both Democrats and Republicans, to get that feel of rich debate and passion that you normally see. So that's been a problem. But we're struggling through it, and we're back in session on Friday and Saturday of this week, and we're going to vote on an election bill to try to make sure the post office has the resources to deliver the ballots on time. That's the crisis du jour right now. My mom and her aunts, my aunts, her sisters, 5 of them, as well as 2 of my sisters, my in-laws, my cousins. A lot of them work at the post office, so that's been sort of the family business for the Lynch family, civil service. But I've been very much engaged in working on that issue. I brought in all the postal workers. I've been sitting with them, trying to figure out a way to make sure that the mail gets delivered. Unfortunately, the Postmaster General removed a lot of these high-speed sorting machines. We're working to get those put back in, but it's a real challenge. And unfortunately, the president and the Postmaster General are actually deliberately trying to obstruct the election process and the delivery of ballots and the mail. There's no evidence that there's been fraud through the mails on elections, but it's something that the president continues to push. But it is false.
Absolutely. And I hope that this work that you guys are doing in the next couple of days really helps out, because I think a lot of people have a lot of confusion about what's going on, especially with rumors of, mailboxes being ripped up, just brick and mortar completely physically. So I know it's been a huge question, and yeah. I hope that work does pan out and you guys are able to make it a little bit more clear what's available to people in terms of being able to vote.
Yeah, we are hopeful. We have a good bill. I'm a lead co-sponsor, and I'm on the committee that oversees the post office, so I've been very involved there. It's Caroline Maloney's. She's the lead sponsor. She's our chairwoman. It's called the Deliver for America Act, and it provides $25 billion for the post office. So it'll give them the resources to keep their people on the job and make sure that the mail gets delivered. So that's a vote on Saturday. I'll be voting for it. Of course, we're going to have to rely on the Senate to process this bill and for the president to sign it. So we've got challenges in front of us as well.
An uphill battle, but I wish you guys luck.
Thank you.
So I wanted to shift gears a little bit, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the education system, because if you ask anybody right now what their main problem and their main priority would be, the first, second, third, all the way to 12th answer would be something to do with getting back into the fall amidst this entire pandemic. I want to take that aside for a second, though, and want to pretend that this was maybe last year, or if we're going into this year and we didn't have this coronavirus threat looming over the education system. What would you say is that biggest threat to education, and what do you think would be the way to fix it?
Well, I don't want to, even though your question invites me to forget about the pandemic, and I think it has had such a profound effect on every aspect of our lives. it's fanciful, it's fantasy to really try to address the problems in our education system without considering what's going on right now. So with all due respect, I appreciate the question, but you know, we have to deal with reality. And so what we've done in the CARES Act, we provided $30.75 billion in grants to provide, emergency support to local school systems. And that's very, very important. We also identified areas of disparate impact where you've got minority communities that have suffered more greatly than some others. So we've tried to target the money in a way that, there are a couple of instances. One, you got an urban area where maybe it's heavily minority and you don't have the computers to do remote learning, right? I just had a situation down in Hull in my district, and we were able to take a $400,000 grant and get it to the school system. They applied for it, and now they'll be able to buy $400,000 worth of those Apple laptops, so they'll be able to do that. In other situations across the country, and this is a national epidemic, national pandemic, excuse me, we've actually had problems with broadband, so that these rural communities, they just don't have the infrastructure there. So in our surface transportation bill that we did several weeks ago, that I'm on the transportation committee as well, we were able to put in billions of dollars in funding to try to address both those problems. The one that I described in the urban area, where you may have, lack of, laptops, and also those areas in the rural areas, the red states often, that don't have access to broadband. So we've tried both those. So that $30.75 billion is already out there, and it's helping, as we saw down in Hull a couple of weeks ago. And then now the HEROES Act, which was passed 3 months ago, and it sits on Mitch McConnell's desk, has $100 billion for the Department of Education, but 90 billion out of that 100 billion is to states, cities, towns, counties, and tribal governments to inject that money into our school systems to, in some cases, if they can do hybrid, and in other cases, and it all depends on the local school system with coordination with the teachers. You've got to have that because, look, places like Florida are lit up. Places like Texas, Arizona, Georgia, they're absolutely lit up with coronavirus. And that's a different situation that I think has to be made by the school districts with the teachers and the parents, and thinking about what they have on the ground there. Here in Massachusetts, we have 1.4% or something like that, very low numbers. And I give Governor Baker great credit for staying on top of this and being more cautious than some people were arguing he might be. We've got a different situation where that hybrid model, where some kids go in on certain days and others don't. I think there may be towns and cities and school districts that might be able to handle that. But again, the decision has to be made on the ground in coordination with the teachers, because some of these teachers are in a vulnerable, all of them are in a vulnerable position. If you have a cluster like this and they take it home, it's just a very bad situation. So having been a union president, I empathize with the teachers unions because they're trying to keep their members safe. And I totally get that. And they're treating it with an abundance of caution. So I absolutely insist that the teachers have to be part of that conversation, and their safety, their concerns have to be addressed.
And we've even seen that on a local level within Westwood itself. We've seen the teachers union be a part of that conversation and offer their inputs on when the decision has to be made between hybrid models or all at home models or all in school models. So I think your point is very well taken, that it's not just what the district or what the guidelines teach, it's what the teachers also need in order to feel safe to go back into those classrooms in the fall.
Right. Now, and Westwood is unique. you have a very, very, very engaged parent community, especially the moms. You've got infrastructure there. That high school looks like a college campus. It's well equipped. I'm sure the broadband and laptop situation is sufficient. So again, I go back to the situation where Westwood should decide, right? In that situation, you know the situation best, rather than someone like me coming in with a one size fits all edict and
Because
saying,
what's going to
okay,
work out in Westwood might not work out in another community,
that's right.
which will in another community, and then
Or another
it,
state,
yeah,
because that's what we're faced with. When we pass something nationally, usually it's a one size fits all approach, and I don't think that's appropriate under these circumstances.
absolutely. My next question has to do a little bit with unemployment, and I think that we're coming into a time where that's going to become a very important conversation to talk about. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about a plan of attack that you want to undertake to address unemployment within our district.
Right. So as you know, before this pandemic, we had a pretty good situation with our employment in most areas. I did have problem areas in Brockton, some of the greater Brockton area. We did have problems with certain skill sets. So right now, the federal government operates, I think, 91 separate job training programs, and they've grown up organically, and there's not great cohesion in our job training programs. So I sense, even though each one defends itself very well, I really think there's a better way to coordinate that in a way that trains people for the jobs that are being created today. Some of them are very old programs and are not really well suited to the jobs that are being created in today's economy. And so I think we have to right size those and maybe do some consolidation, maybe end some of those programs and take the money and put it into programs that work. So there's that whole discussion that's ongoing. As a former union president and someone who was very much, I went through an apprenticeship program with the ironworkers, and I went through an apprenticeship program at the shipyard because they wanted to train us to do that specific work. There's a real role as well in bringing in non-traditional employees into the manufacturing and construction industries, women, racial minorities, people who haven't necessarily had the that legacy within their community or in society where women and people of color are invited in. So I was very, very instrumental in the ironworkers in diversifying our workforce so that it looked like the city in which we operated. Very proud. I had unanimous support among the Black Ironworkers Association in terms of supporting their right, and also the Women in Construction. I came out of Wentworth Institute, so they're a very active group there as well. But so we've got the HEROES Act that we passed, as I say, 3 months ago. It continues the $600 plus up on unemployment benefits, which is incredibly important in high wage states and high cost states where rents and food and housing is on the high end. We've had complaints by some of the southern states, Arkansas, Mississippi, that it's it's incentivizing people to stay home. But I really think people want to go back to work, but if they feel unsafe and they're risking themselves, their lives and their families' lives, then they're not going back to work, and I don't blame them. We also provide another round of stimulus, so the $1,200 check with the dependent bonus as well. That's in there, and we continue that till January 1st. We also look at the student loan situation for kids in that spot, and we extend that student loan forgiveness 1 year out. So this is not going to end anytime soon. And so families and people are in a situation where those loans are not payable. There's just not, there's no economy there to support it. And so we've suspended that as well. So we've tried to hold everybody harmless. At the same time, we've looked at industries, the construction industry. There were protocols that were adopted to have testing on site. So they test the workers coming in. We've funded that. We also funded PPE for a lot of the companies, so that if they want to introduce people back into the workplace, they're able to do that. But I think to get us up and running, we're going to have a vaccine or some medication that will allow us to reduce the contagiousness of the disease, so it can't be spread. And I really believe that there's a lot of pent-up demand out there, that once we get this figured out, it'll be a matter of months, of course. But I do think that a lot of these construction sites that they pressed the pause button, a lot of expansion, a lot of businesses will be able to ramp up if we allow them to survive. And that's why the PPP, that payroll protection program that I supported, has been a godsend to a lot of these companies that are just, in a way, you look at it as staying alive money, right? For some of these businesses to just be able to stay in place. And some of them are just doing takeout if it's a restaurant, or limited services as if they're into personal services. But it's allowing them to survive. It takes a lot of courage to open up a business, and a lot of those family-owned businesses and small businesses are really in a precarious place right now. So we're trying to keep them alive until the economy can turn around as a result of either medication and mitigation, or a vaccine and a cure.
It's hoping to weather the storm and get them through this harsh time until, as you said, they're able to just kind of get back on their feet and make sure that they're ready to continue to offer the services that they know how to. It's just a matter of getting through the next couple of months.
Yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the opioid crisis, because this has been a huge issue, not only nationally, but specifically in Massachusetts. We've seen a number of high-rise situations going on. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what is going on with the opioid crisis in terms of what's being done to combat it, and what do you think could be done a little bit better, or what is not in place that needs to be in place in order to be more effective?
Well, I've got a long history on this. Back in the late 90s, when I was a state senator, we had a suicide cluster in my home neighborhood of South Boston. A significant amount of that was tied to the opioid and heroin problem. Kids started out with, maybe stealing drugs from the medicine cabinet. And then when they couldn't get OxyContin, they went to heroin. It was a major problem. I think we lost 16 young men initially in about 18 months, suicide cluster. I actually founded the Cushing House for Boys, which was, at that time, the practice was to co-locate children who were drug addicted in adult facilities, which is just a bad situation. So there were no adolescent residential drug rehab facilities. So I founded the first one. I got funding through the state. I went to my local community health center. I went to my union brothers and sisters, and we built it basically with volunteer efforts. Lee Kennedy Construction came in and donated much of the equipment to get it done. And we opened up a 24-bed facility for boys at the time. I also collaborated with what was then the New England Medical Center, but now it's obviously Tufts. And then once we had that situation stabilized, we recognized obviously that young women were having similar problems. And so we founded the Cushing House for Girls. So now we've got 44 beds. And I'm proud to say I founded that effort. So I also when I got elected to Congress, I knew this problem, because of my time in dealing with it. So what I did was I introduced legislation and had a field hearing, it was my first field hearing on my bill to ban OxyContin. That's how bad I thought this was. Of course, a lot of the pain community, the pain management community came out and opposed me. And the problem wasn't as well known back then, so I was defeated soundly by the drug companies. I don't think a lot of communities realized what was going on. One community did, and that was Kentucky. Kentucky had pill mills down there. So what I did was and it's a Republican state, but Hal Rogers, who's a Republican pal of mine, he and I got together and we formed the Prescription Drug Caucus to try to, because we both seem to be, dealing with it firsthand, the whole issue. So he and I formed this caucus, and we brought in legislators from all over the country. Slowly, as this scourge became known, more and more members joined, to the point where we had a huge conference down in Atlanta, Hal and I, and we brought in, a lot of it was states attorney generals and state prosecutors who were seeing that, and Bill Keating was very much involved. He was the, he was the Norfolk County District Attorney at the time. He was seeing a lot of that. Mike and Mike Morrissey, who's our current, they all came down. We had people from all over the country come down, but that was the first time it really became a whole of government approach that we worked on. So, we do have some protocols that are promising. We have others that I think are just substitutes for OxyContin, and we've got to distinguish between the two. So we're working on it right now for funding for some of those programs that we actually think do make a big difference and get people on the right path. We've been very involved with our prison population, because here in Massachusetts, I think it's 92% of our prison population is dually addicted. Either it's alcohol or it's drugs. So that's the underlying problem. When you look at the prison population and incarceration, we're trying to incarcerate our way out of this problem, and that's not it. We got to get at that underlying drug and alcohol problem, and I think it will get at the problem. And rather than separating people from their communities and their churches and their families and their unions, bring the courts in and bring the whole of community approach to that problem. So it's all tied in, but we're still working on it. And also, in the CARES Act and the HEROES Act, we were able to we did the old CARE Act, which was Elijah Cummings, my dear friend. He was seeing this in Baltimore in his district, and we put a bill together that would bring $10 billion per year over 10 years to fight this crisis. So that's something that we're still working at. It would be $2 billion to states with the highest level of overdoses, $2.7 billion to the hardest hit counties and cities, and $1.7 billion for public health surveillance, biomedical research, and also better training for healthcare professionals.
You had mentioned the incarceration rates, and I want to talk a little bit, just kind of as an aside. Do you believe that these, you said it was an above 90% rate of people who have some type of substance abuse that are inside this system? Do you feel like that's causing more harm than good by having that incarceration rate be so high and synonymous with that? Or do you feel like it's kind of just two things that happen to be correlated?
No, it's all, it's all baked in. So we have a program right now that I've been involved in, a total immersion program with our courts. And what we've done, and we've had a great community of judges that have worked on this, but it's really dealing with using the courts to bring in those groups, the family, the churches, the temples, the mosques, uh, and and local government and institutions and the substance abuse community and recovery community to identify candidates when they're coming out of prison that they have this underlying problem, to help them in it's a prison release program, but it also does much more than that. It addresses that underlying problem and then tries to guide that person. So we cut the recidivism rate, because many of those 92% are repeat offenders, and you've got to break that cycle. So it's all tied in together. And, I think Mike Bellotti down at the Norfolk County Sheriff's Office was absolutely terrific on this, on a lot of different levels. But, it's got to be a whole of government and a whole of community approach, and just sticking people in jail for a certain period of time. They're coming out. They're coming out. And what are they going to be doing when they come out? And how do you change that behavior and provide that support system around the individual so you break that cycle? So that's our way out of it. And we fortunately now have the resources that are focused on this, and we've also learned from our mistakes, right? And so I see. And it's almost a county by county realization, because you do see in Massachusetts, a lot of the sheriffs now are completely into this, where they're doing as much work outside the prison as they once were doing inside the prison. And that goes for Hampden County, Norfolk County, Suffolk County. It's a whole revolution in terms of how we treat that incarcerated person and how we prepare them for the outside. So it's exciting, but unfortunately it's new. It's new in many of these areas, and it's probably non-existent in some of the western and southern areas that don't have the resources or the expertise to launch something like this. But we are doing it.
Yeah, we had also spoken a few months ago with Jerry McDermott, who's the sheriff for Norfolk County right now.
Right,
and he was mentioning some of those programs that have been implemented. So I'm
that's
glad to see
correct.
that check.
Yeah. That's right. And Jerry knows. He's been he's woke, I guess is what you could say. he gets it. He gets it.
Absolutely. So bringing it back to a more broader level, especially on a federal level, because a huge topic of conversation has always been about climate change. And I'm wondering if you can talk about what you see is a sensible action plan that can help combat climate change. And especially with what's being done now, there's a number of different plans in place. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you see as the effectiveness of some of those plans.
Sure. So I signed on to the Green New Deal, but it is aspirational in most part, in large part. So it talks about where we want to be and what we'd like to do if the technology is there to allow it to happen. So and I fully support that. Now, more immediately though, we have had a reversal of fortunes here with the Trump administration. So they pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, which was disastrous in terms of in terms of the U.S. role. Climate change is a global problem, and so when it takes us out of that community and says that the U.S. is not going to do its part, it gives cover to some other countries that may not want to do it, and they say, well, the United States is one of the biggest polluters, and they're not doing anything, so why the heck should we?
Kind of like a monkey see, monkey do type thing, where it's just going to be a domino effect.
And also, I mean, how do I go to Yemen? How do I go to Afghanistan or Iraq and then, explain how, a reliance on a oil economy is not the way you should be going? And I mean, what credibility do I have as a representative of the United States to talk about, how we can better or persuade, countries in the Amazon region that they shouldn't be, slashing and burning to create, farmland. I guess it's a credibility issue when we pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. You wouldn't mind, but the Paris Climate Accord was voluntary. In other words, each country set their own standards that they would adhere to. So it wasn't, the president kept talking about, Europe was forcing us into this. No, that's not how this works. Each country looks at their own situation and sets their own goals. So the United States set its own goal, and then he tore it up and pulled it. I think it was just a thing for his base, the people that don't believe in climate change. That's number one. Second, so we need to get back into Paris. Okay, we need to get back into that accord, and we need to be a leader. That has to happen, and people want us to do that. I went to the Munich Security Conference not long ago. We actually did the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, 75th anniversary of Normandy, and a lot of those multilateral conversations with our allies, and they're still our allies, was around climate change and how we're going to address this. So that needs to happen. The other thing I would point to is the Trump administration has reversed over 100 EPA executive orders that President Obama, President Bush, George W. Bush, and others had put in place over the years. So that's really, really unfortunate. It deals with from lead and arsenic in the water to drilling in the Alaskan, natural wildlife preserve, things like that. Drilling off the coast of the United States in areas that we believe are extremely sensitive environmentally. All of that. So we need to put those back in place, and that clearly has been a major problem in terms of trying to get the EPA or allowing the EPA to do their job. We've got some great people at the EPA. I worked with them over in Walpole, where we cleaned up a huge hazardous site, and they did a wonderful job coming in there. And when I represented Medfield, we had a similar situation along the river there. So you've got some people at the EPA who went to work there for all the right reasons, and now they're being handcuffed because the president is reversing the policies and procedures that allowed them to do their job. So we need to get back on the right page here. And look, there are ways to create jobs. So I'm a union president, right? And my job every day is to put people to work. There are incredibly productive ways to put people to work in a green economy. There'll be different jobs, but that always happens. That's a pattern in practice and a fact of development. But I am 100% confident that we can replace any jobs that come out of the biofuel industry with green jobs. There'll be better jobs, better paid jobs, and they'll have a strengthening and positive impact on the environment that we create.
More specifically, what can you see as more jobs that are green being introduced into, say, the 8th District? What can that actually look like if we wanted to transition away from biofuel into more green territory?
Sure. We don't have a big, biofuel. We don't have a big petrochemical job base here in Massachusetts specifically. It's big in Louisiana, Texas, places like that. So I think we are less invested in those old technologies. And we also have a very high skilled and high value, high intellectual value workforce. So I think that look at solar. We've done studies, and we've actually created incentives to create more programs and more opportunities for clean technologies to emerge and to prosper. One of the the surface transportation bill just came out, as I mentioned. I'm on that committee, and I think I got 5 or 6 amendments, my bills that became amendments to that bill through in the last 6 weeks. So one of my amendments was a bill that I took off the shelf. It was called the Green Buses for Every City Act. And so what I have been doing for a long time, probably 15 or 16 years, is I've been getting zero emission buses for Brockton because of the health disparities there. And there were so limited resources available that I could only get 1 or 2 per budget, because every other member of Congress is trying to get them too, right? But I've been able to get 1 or 2 to try to refit that fleet down there, that bus fleet, with zero emission buses to help the environmental problem, which will help with the disparate impact on health in that community. This year, because it has become so popular, my bill basically ties into a $1.7 billion allocation appropriations that we're making for zero emission buses around the country. So this is like a 500% increase in what we used to do, but there's so much demand out there. And my amendment specifically says minority communities with higher disparate impact in terms of health, and urban communities that are dealing with that, low income communities where a lot of manufacturing and other let's call unfriendly environmental operations seem to locate in those areas where the community doesn't have the resources, or the population doesn't have the voice to stop it. So those buses would be injected into those areas. Of course, the buses travel all through, so it'll help everybody. But I think most importantly, like the Brockton area transit, it'll help them enormously, because they do that loop in and through Brockton, but also to the Bridgewaters and other communities, Stoughton as well. So I think it'll have a broader and more impactful result.
I just moved to Stoughton, so I'd be happy to see those
Oh,
kind of
okay.
coming
There
through
you
back
go.
and forth. Yeah.
Okay.
So kind of changing topics a little bit. I do want to talk a little bit about LGBTQ rights,
Sure.
which has been a huge conversation. And I want to talk a little bit about what you see as policies to be put in place to protect LGBTQ rights in the workplace, as well as some of the protections that can be given towards youth. Because I think that both of those communities are both very separate in those approaches, but are obviously very tied together in a very tight way.
Yeah. Well, this is I think it's a high water mark, I think, for a lot of the progress that we've been trying to make for many years. I see, I've never been more optimistic, let's put it that way, in creating a world where no matter who you love, there's a place for you to be welcomed in our society, right? That's our goal here, that no matter who you love, no matter what your preference is, no matter what your color, race, ethnicity, religion, that America is a place that is welcoming to you. So this year, well, going back to 2015, we first introduced the Equality Act, which would amend our Civil Rights Act to include gender identity and sexual preference as areas that are protected within our Civil Rights Act, which would have a huge impact. Provides a cause of action. So if anybody were discriminated, there's a legal venue that they can take there. But it also says to government that this is a constitutional mandate. This is a statutory mandate that you have to protect LGBTQ plus people. So I'm a proud member of the LGBTQ plus caucus. In addition to the HR 5, which is the Equality Act, we're also I've been very involved. So we had a case that came up. I'm trying to think of the name. It was the Bostock case, which actually brought this issue forward to the courts, to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court agreed with the amicus brief that I signed, which talked about the immutable characteristics of being a person, you know, an LGBTQ plus person, and how similar arguments in the past were used for people of race and ethnicity and religion to be protected under the Civil Rights Act. So the courts agreed with that. So now our job is to make sure that the federal government is Bostock compliant, right? So that they, across government, across the country, they make sure that we are living up to the letter of the law as articulated in the Bostock case. So that'll be a challenge, right? Under this president, and I think under some governors, but and in some states. But I think that's the way forward. I think that's the leverage that we were asking for. And we're gonna continue to push for the Equality Act. You know, I won't predict, but I would say that you know, if Joe Biden were the president, we would be in a totally different circumstance. What the possibilities are, the probabilities of that bill passing, I think it's very reasonable. It has the support of the Supreme Court. It's consistent with their reasoning, and that would be a proud day.
Absolutely. So I'm coming up on my last couple of questions.
Sure.
Probably the last specific one I have, because we'll tie this back into 2020. This has been a bit of a hectic year, and I think a lot of people would not be able to deny the effect that the Black Lives Matter movement has had, especially in the wake of the George Floyd protests. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you see as potentially the most important thing that can come out of these protests that we're seeing nationwide that are still ongoing, even now that it's August. These are still going on, and these still have a poignant meaning. I'm wondering if you can talk about what effect you think that's going to have for America.
Yeah, well, you know, I've attended probably a dozen of the, you know, we're back and forth from Washington, but when I was home, I was able to attend about a dozen of the Black Lives Matter protests or vigils or marches. We actually had I organized a Catholic mass here in South Boston for racial justice and equality. Cardinal O'Malley actually came down and said the mass, which was great. But I would say that for me, what I see as the most important development out of that whole movement so far. I'm a original co-sponsor of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, but that's only part of it, right? That's the legislate. You cannot simply legislate justice, right? It's put in place. It's justice is maintained by humans, and so it can be a mixed bag sometimes, especially for some populations, some vulnerable populations where there's institutional racism. But well, let me talk about that first. You know, the Justice and Policing Act, George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, accomplishes a number of things. It gets us away from the warrior protocol in how we train our police officers. So when I was in Canton, I spoke at the Black Lives Matter event in Canton, and we had a lot of clergy there. But you know, the police chief brought all the cadets who had just passed the test to attend the police academy out to the Black Lives Matter event and had them stand there and watch. And then we introduced them. We kind of recognized them, and they'll be the first class that really, I think, will be trained, indoctrinated, educated in a way that makes them starkly aware of the inequities and the hostilities that sometimes the police department presents to communities of color. I thought that was important. In Norwood, same thing. Chief Brooks brought, he's got a fairly diverse police department there anyway. He brought them all out, and they really were co-sponsors of that Black Lives Matter event. So I think what it's doing is, the bill itself, so it changes the legal standard for prosecuting someone like Officer Chauvin, who kneeled for 8 minutes and 49 seconds on George Floyd's neck. It changes the liability standard for police officers that do that. That is the vast majority of police officers are good people. They're there for the right reasons, but you do get bad police officers once in a while. And given that we have 64,000 police forces. I think that's 64,000, including sheriff's departments and county police officers. So they're all over the country. Many of them have use of force policies that have not been updated in a long time, and that are probably similar to the Minneapolis Police Department use of force policy. So we change that. We make first of all, we take away the protections for anybody acting like that, either deliberately or recklessly under the civil rights statute. So we eliminate that, and we put a ban in for that purpose. We provide a legal cause of action where someone who was wronged actually has a cause of action for damages if a person does something like that, which was never the case before. So, and this was a bill that was drafted by John Lewis, who was working on this for 60 years. Karen Bass, who was the head of the Congressional Black Caucus. I was an original co-sponsor, Maxine Waters, and others. So this was what we saw as the solution based on the experience of all these people who had been working on this for such a long time. And I'm proudest to say that we had great support from the Police Chiefs Association from around the country. So they came forward and said, we need this. So that's the one part. That's the legislative part. The other part is this. Look, and I said this in Canton and in Abington when I spoke, and down in Hull when I spoke at the Black Lives Matter event. Looking back in our history, it was a very small group of people who came out against slavery back, in the early 1800s and mid 1800s. And it was people like William Lloyd Garrison and Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass and John Quincy Adams. And they were highly unpopular when they brought that consciousness and that opposition out to the general public. Even in northern states, they were highly unpopular at the time. They were seen as, pariahs. But because of the righteousness of their cause and because of the way they conducted themselves in speech, in peaceful speech, to persuade the wider population, they came around. They came around to see an institution, slavery, which had been in place for 2,000 years, since the beginning of time. They realized the wrongness of owning a human being, and we fought a war in this country over it. Well, they opened the eyes of people at that time, those abolitionists. What we have today is these young people, I refer to them as the new abolitionists, because this stuff was going on. These killings sporadically and some not so sporadically were going on for a considerable amount of time. And yet we failed to see that. We, as a society, we failed to see that. And it was the young people, mostly young people, who came out and said, hey, this is wrong. You need to look at this. This is wrong. And, with the help of technology and cell phones and videos and things like that, you saw what happened, on the streets of America and actually on the streets of Europe in response to that. So I give them great credit. But the bottom line is the biggest change will be personally. how we all view this and how we recognize this as something that needs to be eradicated. This institutional racial injustice needs to be eradicated. So I think the greatest gift that we have from that movement, and we continue to get from that movement, is that people are more aware. People are more aware of the insidious ways that institutional racism exists in our society. I'll close with this. Probably a month before he passed, John Lewis had me on a conference call with a woman named Robin DiAngelo. So it was the Congressional Black Caucus, but Robin DiAngelo wrote a book called White Fragility, and how hard it is for white people to see racism, and she talked about it, and she talked about the fact that just because you grew up in difficult circumstances, maybe you grew up in public housing, maybe you consider your life has been hard growing up. My dad always used to say there were some times in my family we had to save up to be poor. So she said, even though you may think you had it hard, try to think about what your life would have been if you had it hard and you were Black. Would you have been able to overcome some of the things that you've overcome? Would you have been able to achieve what you've been able to achieve if you were given the same circumstances, but if your skin was Black, trying to do those same things in today's society? And she was right about that. She was right about that. And I think, I ended up reading her book, as John recommended, and some of these biases that we have are not, it's not the Ku Klux Klan out there with a torch. That's not racism. It's much subtler than that. It's part of it's policing. I didn't have to have a conversation with my girls about how they respond to a police officer, how to make themselves safe from law enforcement. And that's a conversation that I understand now that my Black colleagues have with their kids. They all get the talk. And so it's things like that that make you more aware of the challenges that are out there and how hard it's going to be. So we all need to work on it. It's a change that needs to happen in our hearts. And try not to dismiss it. Try to embrace it, and try to understand. Try to think what it's like to go through life as a person of color in our society, and how difficult those challenges are, and think about how we might be able to make it better, and move our country to be a more perfect union for everyone. So that's the goal. But my greatest fear is that we lose this moment, and that we don't move significantly forward. I think we will. I think, especially the one thing I didn't agree with Miss DiAngelo's book is she said the young people are just as bad, in terms of their racial attitudes. I don't think that at all. I spent time with these kids, and whether it was Hull or Canton or Hingham or Norwood or Brockton, these kids get it. They're much more aware, and I would not cast the sins of their parents and grandparents on them. I think they're better people. I think, with the urgings of their parents to move forward, it's a progression. But I really do think that they get it. And, whether in the future, I just think in this country, it'll be a better place, no matter who you love, whether you're LGBTQ plus or a person of color. I think it's solvable. I'm optimistic about this. I just think that there's a better America out there, and we're moving toward it.
Absolutely. That was a Great sentiment, and I think that that's really well appreciated, especially for the people who might be watching. I wish we'd end on that, but I do have one final question, which is
Sure.
to ask if there's anything, we've talked about a broad spectrum of different things today, but I do want to give you the opportunity to talk about something that we did not necessarily go over, because there's only so many questions that we can ask and come up with. But if there's anything you feel very passionate about that you want people to remember as something that you stand for, what would that be?
Well, what I'd like to use my time for right now is really the essence of democracy and how that all works. So I spent an awful lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan and Yemen, Gaza. So because of my committee, I spend a lot of time in failed states and states that are near failing. Pakistan's got some huge problems. A lot of countries in the Middle East, but the one common thing I see, well, several of the common factors I see in those countries are the lack of an independent judiciary, their legal system. It's political. It's driven by whoever's in power, and so there's not a system of justice. There's not a justice department. There's the executive, the prime minister or the president, and he influences the brand of, or she influences the brand of justice that people receive within that society, and it's across the Middle East, Egypt, elsewhere. That wasn't the case for America, right? We have a judicial system that I think rises above, or has risen above, whoever might be the current occupant of the White House. That has changed. That has changed in this country, and it causes me great worry. The fact that the current president is trying to obstruct the election troubles me greatly. This is a different challenge that we've not seen before in this country. I was elected on September 11th, 2001, the day of the attacks. And I honestly feel today that our country is more vulnerable today than it was on the day of the attacks, for a couple of reasons. One, America was united. After those attacks, America came together. I went to Congress. There was a palpable difference there. We had a bipartisan feel there. There was a good vibe. The enemy was external. The threat was external. And we came together against that. That was the feeling, on the attacks and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. So today, I honestly feel that the greatest threat to our democracy is sitting in the White House. I honestly feel that. I feel that the president has wiped his feet on the Constitution at every turn. I'm a law and order guy. I sat on the committee, the oversight committee, and reviewed the depositions on, his involvement and what his ambassadors told us he ordered in terms of dealings with Russia. And I voted to impeach and remove this president based on the evidence. And that wasn't a happy decision on my part. I believe in America. America is not just a place; it's an idea, and it's a beacon to the world. And I just regret that my colleagues in the Senate did not join with us and remove this president. So, and that's not a happy. I'm not someone who goes around kicking Republicans in the shins just to make myself feel good. That's not me. That's not me. I miss some of the moderate Republicans who have left because they cannot serve with the current president. So look, but I do believe in the hope and the promise of America. And I just ask the people of Westwood, please consider me for your vote. Please don't lose faith in America. We do have a great system. We have provided more hope, more freedom than any other country around the globe, for over 230 years. And we can get back, I think, on a good path, a good trajectory, which again, moves us towards that more perfect union that we all hope for. The system is in place. The system is there. It's, America made a bad decision back in 2016, but we can undo that. And it's been an honor for me to represent the town of Westwood and the entire congressional district. I'm very proud of the work that I've done and been able to do. I'm one of 435 members of Congress, so you need 218 votes to get anything done in Congress. So I don't take credit. Whenever I have to get something done, I need to go talk to 217 other people to get anything done. So it would be wrong for me to take undue credit on anything I've done. I've had wonderful partners, both within the delegation and without, and within the Democratic Party and without. So I just want you to know how each and every day I try to live up to the highest expectations of the people of Westwood. And I would dearly appreciate if you would return me to Congress so that I could continue that work. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. That was a very insightful way to end things. And I really appreciate the time that you gave us today. I'm sure people who are watching have a much better opinion and understanding about who you are and are more informed when they go to the polls. So Congressman Lynch, thank you very much for the time. That was very well appreciated.
Thank you, Connor. It was a joy. I felt like it was a conversation and not an inquisition, so I give you credit for that.
That's a good thing, hopefully.
It is. Oh, yeah. Very good. Yeah.
Well, as a reminder, the state primaries will be held on September 1st, and the general elections will be held in November on November 3rd. I have been Connor Lynch with Westwood Media Center. Thank you very much for watching.